Concepts: Krishna, devotee; Bhakti, devotion. In the Hare Krishna tradition, the relationship between Krishna, the devotee, and Bhakti, devotion, is deeply intertwined. A devotee expresses their love and service through Bhakti, which in turn brings them closer to Krishna. Krishna reciprocates this devotion, providing support and blessings to the devotee. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, "To those who are constantly devoted and who worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me." Bhagavad Gita 10.10. This reciprocal relationship creates a harmonious cycle where Krishna, the devotee, and Bhakti coexist and reinforce each other's presence and significance. Concepts: Maya, illusion; avidya, ignorance; samsara, cycle of birth and death. The Hare Krishna philosophy posits that Maya, avidya, and samsara maintain a state of equilibrium, perpetuating the cycle of material existence. Ignorance, avidya, fuels Maya, the illusion of the material world, which keeps souls trapped in samsara, the cycle of birth and death. As long as individuals remain ignorant of their true spiritual nature, they continue to be ensnared by Maya and reborn in samsara. The Bhagavad Gita states, "Deluded by ignorance, thus bewildered, persons are engrossed in the illusory material world." Bhagavad Gita 7.13. Concepts: chanting, purification, spiritual advancement. In the practice of bhakti, chanting the Hare Krishna mantra leads to the purification of the heart and mind. This purification fosters spiritual advancement, drawing the devotee closer to Krishna. As one advances spiritually, their chanting becomes more sincere and effective, further accelerating their purification. The Bhagavad Gita highlights this process. By chanting the holy name of the Lord, one becomes purified in heart and thus becomes eligible to engage in devotional service. Bhagavad Gita 9.14. Concepts: material desires, ego, suffering. Material desires feed the ego, inflating one's sense of self-importance and attachment to worldly pleasures. This heightened ego inevitably leads to various forms of suffering, as one's expectations and desires remain unfulfilled. In response to suffering, individuals often seek to fulfill more material desires, creating a negative feedback loop. The Bhagavad Gita warns, "From anger, complete delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool." Bhagavad Gita 2.63. Concepts: Krishna Consciousness, self-realization, liberation. Krishna Consciousness, or the awareness and devotion to Krishna, leads to self-realization, the understanding of one's true spiritual identity. This self-realization is a prerequisite for liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Conversely, without Krishna Consciousness, liberation remains unattainable. The Bhagavad Gita emphasizes, "One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman." Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Concepts: ignorance, attachment, rebirth. Ignorance of one's true spiritual nature leads to attachment to material possessions and relationships. This attachment binds the soul to the cycle of rebirth. Being reborn in the material world perpetuates ignorance, thus continuing the cycle. The Bhagavad Gita states, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. Bhagavad Gita 2.22. Concepts: bhakti, devotion, association with devotees, spiritual knowledge. Bhakti, or devotion, often leads to spiritual knowledge, which in turn encourages one to seek the association of other devotees. This association further strengthens one's devotion. Conversely, without bhakti, spiritual knowledge is difficult to attain. The Bhagavad Gita notes, "Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth." Bhagavad Gita 4.34. Concepts: ignorance, karma, birth and death cycle. Without spiritual knowledge, one does not seek the company of devotees, and without such association, devotion cannot flourish. This lack of devotion keeps one trapped in ignorance and the cycle of karma, perpetuating birth and death. The Bhagavad Gita explains, "Those who are devoid of knowledge cannot understand the truth about Krishna, his birth and activities. They are deluded and bound by karma." Bhagavad Gita 9.11-12. Concepts: chanting, service, surrender. Chanting the Hare Krishna mantra inspires devotees to engage in service to Krishna and other devotees. This service deepens their surrender to Krishna, creating a holistic spiritual practice. Surrender, in turn, enhances the quality and frequency of chanting and service. The Bhagavad Gita states, Engage your mind always in thinking of me, offer obeisances and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. Bhagavad Gita 9.34. Concepts: material attachments, ignorance, suffering. Absence of ignorance leads to the fading of material attachments, and without these attachments, suffering diminishes. This interplay illustrates that enlightenment and detachment are essential to overcoming suffering. The Bhagavad Gita advises, "He who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, who has given up all sense of proprietorship, and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace." Bhagavad Gita 2.71. Concepts: Krishna, devotion, bhakti. Scriptures. Devotion to Krishna naturally connects a devotee to the sacred scriptures that guide their practices. Scriptures, in turn, foster deeper devotion, creating a symbiotic relationship. Krishna, being the central figure of devotion, inspires adherence to scriptural teachings. The Bhagavad Gita asserts, "In the association of pure devotees, discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and the heart." Bhagavad Gita 10.9. Concepts: Maya, illusion, sense gratification, bondage without Krishna, and the guidance of scriptures, true devotion cannot manifest. This lack of devotion leaves one susceptible to Maya and sense gratification, which lead to bondage in the material world. The Bhagavad Gita warns, "The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this." Bhagavad Gita 15.10. Concepts: devotional practices, sadhana, grace of Krishna, devotee community devotional practices, sadhana, and the grace of Krishna foster a strong devotee community. This community, in turn, supports and enhances individual sadhana and attracts Krishna's grace. Together, these elements create a harmonious and nurturing environment for spiritual growth. The Bhagavad Gita states, "Engage in sadhana with the determination and without deviation. Community with devotees strengthens this resolve." Bhagavad Gita 6.23. Concepts: ignorance, material desires, suffering. Without the grace of Krishna, sadhana and community weaken, leading to a dissonant spiritual life. Ignorance and material desires thrive in such an environment, resulting in increased suffering. The Bhagavad Gita warns, "Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, resultant good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say that there is nothing more than this." Bhagavad Gita 2.42-43. Concepts: chanting, reading scriptures, serving devotees. Chanting the Hare Krishna mantra leads to a desire to read scriptures and serve other devotees. Reading scriptures encourages both chanting and service, creating a convergent path of spiritual practice. Service to devotees further inspires chanting and study, reinforcing the holistic nature of bhakti. The Bhagavad Gita states, "One who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water." Bhagavad Gita 5.10. Concepts: ignorance, selfishness, isolation. Without reading scriptures and serving others, chanting becomes neglected, leading to spiritual isolation. This isolation fosters ignorance and selfishness, further distancing one from spiritual practices. The Bhagavad Gita cautions, "Those who are envious and mischievous, who are the lowest among men, are cast by me into the ocean of material existence, into various demoniac species of life." Bhagavad Gita 16.19. Concepts: surrender, humility, grace, true. Surrender to Krishna, even without complete humility, paradoxically invites his grace. Humility, even without direct grace, encourages surrender. Grace, whether or not full surrender is present, fosters humility. The Bhagavad Gita explains, "He who is humble and free from pride and who has transcended all dualities of happiness and distress knows the truth and is in me." Bhagavad Gita 13.89. Concepts: material attachments, ego, suffering. Without surrender, material attachments lead to suffering. Lack of humility combined with ego results in suffering. Absence of grace and the presence of ignorance lead to suffering. The Bhagavad Gita states, "For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy." Bhagavad Gita 6.6. Concepts: guru, disciple, spiritual instruction. The presence of a guru without a willing disciple complicates spiritual instruction. A disciple without proper instruction may not truly follow the guru. Together, a guru and spiritual instruction create a true disciple. The Bhagavad Gita advises, approach a guru with humility, inquire submissively, and render service. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you. Bhagavad Gita 4.34. Concepts: materialism, doubt, spiritual apathy. Without a guru, materialism leads to spiritual apathy. Lack of instruction and doubt foster apathy. The Bhagavad Gita notes, one who is faithless and ignorant falls back into the cycle of birth and death, failing to achieve the supreme destination. Bhagavad Gita 4.40. Concepts: love for Krishna, sacrifice, inner peace. Love for Krishna encourages sacrifice, leading to inner peace. Sacrifice brings peace, nurturing love for Krishna. Together, they bring profound inner peace. The Bhagavad Gita states, by performing acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance without attachment to results, one attains purification and inner peace. Bhagavad Gita 18.5.6. Concepts: material desires, attachment, spiritual disturbance. Lack of inner peace weakens love for Krishna, fostering attachment. Without love for Krishna, material desires disrupt peace. The absence of peace leads to lack of love for Krishna and increased attachment. The Bhagavad Gita warns, a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. Bhagavad Gita 2.70.